You're destroying yourself trying to keep up with people who don't even notice you. You bend your schedule, your habits, even your dreams, just to match lives that were never built for you. And the cruel truth is this: the more you chase, the further you feel from yourself. Look around. Every time you compare, you shrink. Every time you run after their approval, you silence your own voice. And every time you sacrifice who you are just to fit in, you become invisible in the only life that truly matters, yours. This is why you feel restless, no matter how hard you work. Because chasing others is not progress, it's self-abandonment. You don't notice it at first. It starts small, with one compromise here, one imitation there. But slowly, without realizing, you trade your future for a role in someone else's story. And still, you keep running. You tell yourself it's motivation, when in reality, it's desperation. You tell yourself it's ambition, when in truth it's fear of being left behind. But deep down you know, the harder you chase them, the more you lose yourself. Here's what no one told you. The people you're trying so hard to impress are not even thinking about you. They're busy running their own race. And while you're trapped in the illusion of catching up, your real life, your potential, your growth, your discipline, is being left untouched. But it doesn't have to stay this way. Because the moment you stop measuring yourself by their pace, you free yourself to finally build your own. Fixing your life isn't about running faster. It's about the chase altogether. It's about reclaiming the time, the energy, and the power you've been wasting on people who were never meant to decide your value. In this message, we're going to uncover why you believe this lie in the first place, the hidden cost of living for approval, and how to shift the focus back to you, where it always belonged. By the end, you'll see that the life you've been trying to find in others has been waiting for you inside, all along. From an early age, you were trained to believe that your worth was never really yours to decide. At school, every grade wasn't just a number. It was a silent comparison with everyone else. At home, love often felt conditional, offered when you met expectations rather than when you expressed who you really were. Later, applause changed forms: trophies, promotions, compliments, likes. Slowly, almost invisibly, the message sank in: your value depends on how others see you. It didn't feel like a lie at first, because everyone around you seemed to be living the same way. But that belief has been shaping your choices ever since. It's the reason you hold back an idea until someone approves. The reason you hesitate to take risks, not because you doubt the path, but because you fear the reaction. It's why you trade freedom for permission, identity for applause. This is why so many people never find peace, even when they look successful from the outside. They're running a race without a finish line, chasing recognition that never lasts. Each round of applause fades faster than the last, leaving them restless, forcing them to keep performing, keep pleasing, keep running. And the less you trust yourself. Your inner voice gets quieter while the noise of comparison gets louder. Your own standards blur until you can't tell if your goals are truly yours or just borrowed from someone else. You look at your life and realize much of it was built as a reaction, not as a decision. But here's the truth. The world never promised to validate you. It never agreed to clap for every move you make. That was the illusion, the trap. And the real tragedy isn't that people don't validate you. It's that you gave them the authority to decide your worth. The moment you see this clearly, the spell starts to break. You begin to notice how often your choices are rooted in fear of disapproval. You start to see how much of your life has been postponed, diluted, or abandoned just to avoid judgment. And with that awareness comes an invitation to reclaim the right to define yourself. Because the lie can only survive in silence. The second you name it for what it is, you weaken it. And once it weakens, you can no longer ignore the consequences it has created, the invisible price you've been paying all along. Living under that illusion always comes with a price. It creeps in quietly, disguised as motivation, but what it really does is drain you. You spend hours replaying conversations, questioning whether you sounded good enough, worrying about how you were perceived. That constant second-guessing consumes the energy you could have invested in building something real. And when your energy is spent like that, focus becomes the next casualty. Instead of looking at your own path, you find yourself tracking the lives of everyone around you. Someone else achieves something, and suddenly you feel late. Someone posts their success, and suddenly your progress feels meaningless. While you're distracted by their milestones, your own journey stands still. Soon discipline begins to crack. It's hard to stay committed when every decision is tied to someone else's reaction. You might start a routine, but abandon it the moment it no longer earns attention. You might set a goal, but drop it as soon as it stops impressing others. What looked like ambition was never really yours. It was only borrowed until the applause ran out. The deepest damage, though, is what happens to your identity. Piece by piece, you reshape yourself to fit into molds that don't belong to you. First it feels small, a choice here, a compromise there. But over time, the weight adds. You look in the mirror and realize the person staring back is mostly made of borrowed habits and borrowed values. The real you feels hidden, buried under layers of performance. That's why chasing others is so destructive. It convinces you that success is about catching up, when in reality, it's about standing firm. It tricks you into believing that approval equals progress, when every step you take for applause pulls you further from yourself. And while the years slip away, so do the opportunities that should have been yours, the dream you never started, the risk you never took, the freedom you never claimed. What makes this cost even heavier is how it reshapes your mind. The more you chase, the more you believe you are less capable, less worthy, less ready. That belief becomes a cage. And the longer you live inside it, the more you shrink your own potential, convincing yourself that you'll never measure up. This is why regret becomes inevitable. People don't wake up bitter because they failed. They wake up bitter because they spent their best years running after the wrong things. That's the weight you carry when you let others define you. The knowledge that you're living, but not living as yourself. Yet even in the middle of that cost, the possibility of change remains. Because the moment you recognize the prison, you've already taken the first step out of it. And once you step out, you can begin to turn your focus back where it always belonged. There comes a moment when you realize that chasing others has stolen too much, and the only way forward is to turn inward. The change doesn't come from running faster or trying harder to keep up. It comes from shifting the direction of your attention away from what others expect and back to what you know you need. For most people, this feels foreign, almost uncomfortable, because they've spent years filtering every choice through the question, what will they think? That reflex is so ingrained that they forget how to listen to themselves. But the moment you break it, the weight starts to lift. Progress stops being about the race outside and becomes about the person you're building inside. You're no longer trapped in competition, you're anchored in growth. And growth built on your own terms changes everything. Discipline is no longer a fragile performance. It isn't waking up early just to look impressive, forcing yourself into routines for applause. It becomes the natural outcome of aligning with the kind of person you've decided to be. When the standard comes from within, you no longer quit when the applause fades, because you're no longer running on applause. You're running on principle. With that clarity, focus returns. The constant distraction of comparison begins to lose its grip. You stop scattering your energy in 1,000 directions, chasing milestones that don't belong to you. Become less about restriction and more about freedom, the freedom to pour your time and strength into what actually matters. And here's the truth most people miss. Putting yourself first is not arrogance. That's just another lie designed to keep you small. Real arrogance is living as if the opinions of others should decide your life. Real strength is taking responsibility for who you are becoming. Because when you're aligned with yourself, you have more to give. You lead better, you love deeper, you create more, precisely because you're no longer running empty. Picture a tree in the middle of a forest. It doesn't twist itself to match the height of the one beside it. It grows because its roots are deep, because it draws from its own soil. That's what happens when you stop chasing. You dig into your own values, and from there, you rise naturally, without forcing it, without comparison. You don't need to wait for a new year or some perfect reset to begin. The shift doesn't come from the calendar, it comes from a decision. Right here, in this moment, you can choose to stop performing for an audience that was never watching and start building a life that feels true. It won't be easy. Approval is addictive. Every like, every nod, Every piece of recognition gives you a temporary high, and walking away from that cycle will feel uncomfortable. But each time you resist, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. And once you taste what it feels like to live by your own standards, there's no going back. Slowly, the pressure starts to dissolve. Breathing feels easier. Choices. The energy you once wasted trying to prove yourself begins to flow back into growth. And little by little, you start to recognize yourself again. Not because someone else, because you finally decided to stand with yourself. That's the turning point. The day you should be for them and start asking who you are becoming for yourself is the day you stop running in circles and start walking your own path. That's the kind of shift that doesn't just change your direction, it gives you back your life. Change doesn't happen just because you stop chasing others. Walking away from comparison is only half of the work. The other half is building something strong enough inside you that you no longer feel tempted to run after what doesn't matter. That's where the new foundation begins, not in performance, not in recognition, but in choices made deliberately, rooted in who you want to become. Every life that lasts is built on standards, and those standards must be non-negotiable. They aren't rules to impress others. They are pillars to sustain yourself. When you wake up each morning with clarity about what matters, you no longer drift into the noise of other people's races. You create your own rhythm. Maybe it starts small, deciding to guard your mornings instead of giving them away to distractions, committing to a practice that nourishes your mind before the world demands your attention. These are not just habits. They are declarations that your time and focus are too valuable to be wasted. And once you begin, momentum grows. What feels difficult at first becomes a quiet strength. You start to notice how different it feels to win a battle against yourself, compared to chasing a hollow victory outside. Finishing the book you said you'd read, holding the promise to train your body, choosing to invest in growth instead of cheap entertainment. Each of these moments stacks on top of the last. Slowly, you stop needing applause because you've built proof inside you. You see progress, not in comparison with anyone else, but in the person staring back at you in the mirror. This is where discipline transforms from punishment into freedom. Most people think of discipline as restriction, as cutting away pleasures, as living less. But when it is built on your own foundation, discipline is not about living less. It's about living aligned. It gives structure to your days, not to suffocate you, but to free you from drifting aimlessly. You stop negotiating with yourself because the decision was already made when you set your standard. And that quiet certainty is what separates those who collapse under pressure from those who build a life that lasts. But discipline alone is not enough. Your foundation also requires purpose. Without it, routines turn mechanical and strength becomes empty repetition. Purpose is what connects the small choices to the bigger vision. It is what reminds you that every page read, every early morning, every moment of silence guarded is part of something greater, a life designed, not borrowed. When you connect daily action to long-term meaning, the weight you carry begins to feel lighter. It's no longer about surviving another day. It's about moving one step closer to who you are meant to be. And in this process, clarity grows. You no longer feel torn in 1,000 directions because you know where you are heading. You begin to trust your instincts again, to listen to your own judgment instead of begging for outside approval. That's what a real foundation does. It gives you the strength to stand even when no one claps, to move forward even when no one notices. It silences the craving for recognition, not because you no longer care, but because you've built something deeper than recognition, self-respect. This shift doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the quiet consistency of protecting what matters and discarding what doesn't. It happens in the decision to finish what you start, to keep promises to yourself, to stop excusing the things that weaken you. Each of those decisions is a brick in your foundation. And brick by brick, the structure of your life takes shape, not fragile, not borrowed, but yours. And the beauty of a strong base is that it changes how you face the storms. The of others no longer shake you the way they once did. A setback no longer convinces you to quit. Failure no longer feels like identity. It feels like feedback. Because when the ground beneath you is solid, the winds can blow, but you remain steady. You are no longer scattered, no longer. You are centered, and that makes you unbreakable. This is the real work of fixing your life. Not proving, not performing, but building. It isn't glamorous. It rarely gets attention, but it is what separates those who live endlessly chasing from those who finally arrive. And once the foundation is laid, you begin to notice something remarkable. You don't just feel stronger. You actually are stronger. You've stopped running after others, and in that stillness, you've discovered the strength to move forward on your own terms. There comes a point when routines, habits, and even discipline are not enough on their own. You can build systems, you can create structure, you can guard your time with precision. But if you don't decide who you are becoming, all of it risks collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. The foundation of a rebuilt life is not just action, it is identity. Until you choose who you are, every habit remains fragile, every goal remains temporary. Most people don't realize how much of their identity has been shaped by imitation. They live as reflections of their environment, adjusting themselves to whatever earns approval. Over time, they become actors in a play they didn't write, reading lines they didn't choose, chasing roles that were never meant for them. And then they wonder why discipline feels like a burden and why progress always slips away. It's because they are trying to sustain a life that doesn't belong to them. True change begins when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Who am I choosing to be?" Because when identity shifts, behavior follows. You don't force yourself into discipline, you live it naturally. A runner doesn't wake up every day debating whether to run. They run because they are a runner. A leader doesn't wonder whether to take responsibility. They do it because leadership is part of who they are. Identity turns effort into expression. But here's the challenge. Choosing identity requires courage. It means rejecting the roles others tried to give you. It means silencing voices that say you're not enough, not ready, not worthy. It means standing alone at times, because the person you're becoming doesn't always fit the mold of who others expect you to be. And that discomfort is the very reason most people avoid it. They prefer the safety of borrowed labels over the responsibility of claiming their own. You don't have to accept that fate. You can choose. You can declare that you are no longer a follower of every trend, but the architect of your own path. You can decide that you are not someone who negotiates with weakness, but someone who honors commitments to yourself. You can shape an identity that pulls you forward, rather than one that keeps you trapped in cycles of doubt. And the moment you claim it, something inside you locks into place, a kind of strength that no outside opinion can shake. Think about the times in your life when you felt unstoppable. It wasn't just because you had a plan. It was because, in those moments, your actions aligned with who you believed yourself to be. When identity and behavior are in harmony, even the hardest work feels lighter. But when they are in conflict, even the simplest habit feels heavy. That's why you've struggled in the past. Not because you lacked effort, but because your effort was trying to support an identity you hadn't chosen. And here lies the invitation: to stop seeing yourself as the person who is always chasing, always behind, always proving. Instead, to begin seeing yourself as the person who builds, who decides, who leads. When that shift happens, your actions stop being negotiations and start becoming affirmations. Every choice you make says, "This is who I am." Of course, this is not about perfection. You will stumble. You will face days when the old self tries to pull you back. But the difference is that now you have a compass. You are no longer lost in endless comparison because your direction is set by who you've chosen to be. That clarity doesn't eliminate struggle, but it transforms it. Struggle becomes training instead of punishment. Discipline becomes alignment instead of sacrifice. And the beauty of identity is that it multiplies. When you begin living as the person you've chosen to be, your influence extends beyond yourself. People around you start to notice the difference. They see the steadiness in your decisions, the conviction in your actions, the clarity in your presence. And without even trying, you become a reference point, a reminder of what it looks like to live without chasing. But this can't remain theoretical. Identity is not just something you think about, it's something you practice. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you reinforce it. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, you reinforce it. Every time you stand firm in who you are, Even when others don't understand, you reinforce it. Over time, these repetitions carve the new identity so deeply that it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like truth. This is the transformation that matters most. Because when identity changes, everything changes. You no longer wonder if you can stay consistent. You are consistent. You no longer doubt whether you're worthy. You act from worth. You no longer chase recognition. You embody alignment. And in that embodiment, life begins to take a shape that feels unshakable because it's no longer built on applause. It's built on who you are. So the real question is not whether you'll find the strength to keep going. The real question is, who are you choosing to become? That decision will echo louder than any routine, any plan, any habit. Because once it's made, everything else begins to align. And when it does, you no longer fear losing your path. You've become the path. At some point, the truth becomes undeniable. Chasing others was never really about them. It was about the part of you that didn't believe you were enough. You ran after their approval, hoping it would fill the silence inside. But every step only pushed you further away from yourself. And now, standing here, you know the truth. The race was never yours to begin with. You don't need to run anymore. You don't need to shrink to fit into expectations that were never meant for you. You don't need to silence your voice just to echo someone else's. Life is not built on applause. It's built on alignment. And the moment you stop chasing, you begin to hear something far greater than validation. You hear your own conviction rising, steady and unshakable. The world outside may still try to pull you back. Opinions will still be loud. Distractions will still come dressed as opportunities. But when your foundation is strong and your identity is chosen, none of it has the same power. You walk with a clarity that doesn't beg for permission. You move with a strength that doesn't break when no one is watching. You live with a certainty that says, "This is who I am, and this is the life I am building." That's the freedom you've been chasing all along, but never found in others, because it was waiting for you inside. And once you taste it, once you feel what it means to stand rooted in your own values, you will never again trade it for shallow approval. You will rise, not by imitation, but by becoming the kind of person who no longer needs to prove anything. If these words are echoing inside you, it's because part of you knows you can't keep living the same way. You're not here by accident. You're here because you've reached the point where change is no longer optional. It's necessary. And this is your chance to decide. Will you keep running in circles, or will you finally stand and build the life that belongs to you? If you're ready to choose yourself, then let this be the moment you commit. Don't just close this message and return to the old chase. Take action. And if you want reminders to keep walking this path, subscribe now. Because here, you're not just another number. You're part of a community that has decided to stop running after others and start building from within. And as you move forward, carry this with you. Your life doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be lived. Stop chasing. Stand firm. Focus on you. That's how you fix your life.